This week marks 1 month since George Floyd died at the hands of Minneapolis police officers. Floyd was pinned to the ground as an officer knelt on his neck for more than 8 minutes. His death sparked nationwide protests against racial injustice and calls for police reform. On Thursday, the House took up a bill named in his honor. Skyler Henry has more from Washington.
The House is prepared to pass a police reform bill on the 1-month anniversary of George Floyd's death.
It was not until the advent of the cell phone camera that the stories of police abuse were finally exposed to the world. Before then, the deaths were simply disregarded, not believed, not acknowledged.
The bill includes a ban on chokeholds and would make it easier to file civil lawsuits against officers accused of misconduct.
The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act will fundamentally transform the culture of policing to address systemic racism, curb police brutality, and bring accountability to our police departments.
Republicans say Democrats blocked every amendment they proposed.
Never consulted us on the creation of this bill. I've reached out to those on the Democrat side, explaining that I wanted to make law. I wanted to work together, and I still do.
Senate Democrats made the same complaint before blocking a Republican police reform bill Wednesday.
President Trump says he won't support any bill that hurts police. He's also ordering U.S. Marshals to work with local police to stand guard around statues on federal land across the country.
The president says he will sign an executive order to further protect the statues, and he tweeted that they are some of our great works of art that represent our history and heritage.
I think many of the people that are knocking down these statues don't even have any idea what the statue is, what it means, who it is.
The Army has activated but not yet deployed 400 members of the Washington, D.C. National Guard to prevent any further damage to the monuments.
And Skyler Henry joins me now. Hi, Skyler. In your piece, we saw the president address the removal of Confederate statues. Demonstrators say these monuments are a symbol of racism against the Black community and America's very troubling past. But President Trump says he's going to sign an executive order to protect them. What more do we know about this, and what steps has the administration taken so far?
Well, hey, Lana, good evening to you. From what we know, the president is essentially promising to prosecute any protester who damages these statues at any given moment. In a tweet earlier this week, he said that he wants people to serve up to 10 years in prison for violating these statues on federal property. You can see behind me, this is a statue here. Right in front of the White House, there's actually a fence that was put up in the last day or so, blocking protesters who were once able to get inside Lafayette Square Park. Now they are not able to do so. There's also one right here at St. John's Church that wasn't here a few days ago as well. And so now we see all of these protective measures in place to make sure that people are not able to take down these statues. Now, this is all across the country and here in D.C. We were at a park earlier today, the Emancipation Memorial, I should say, and that statue had Abraham Lincoln kind of overseeing a slave, if you will, being trying to free the slave. And so the plans are to take that statue down for tomorrow. We'll see what happens with that situation between demonstrators and police moving forward. But what I can tell you is that there are a lot of measures in place to make sure that this does not happen. You heard in the piece, President Trump is considering putting the U.S. Marshals out here to work with local law enforcement to protect these statues, as well as the National Guard themselves, Lana.
Yeah, a lot of force and energy being put into protecting these statues. I was amazed when I heard vandalism could result in up to 10 years in prison. I'm wondering, Skyler, are other Republicans supporting these actions, or are they distancing themselves from the president on this issue?
Well, you don't hear much from other Republicans, but as you heard the president say, he thinks that this recognizes our history and our heritage in terms of these statues. Obviously, demonstrators see this as a completely different point of view, representing an oppressed culture in our nation's history, particularly when you're speaking of Black people, quite frankly, and in particular, these Confederate monuments. Now, you'll have other people come out to say, well, what about people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and things like that? We heard Kayleigh McEnany, the president's press secretary, speak to that yesterday, saying that it actually makes zero sense for people people to be targeting those statues. But when you take into the perspective of the fact that people here, at least some of the people that we spoke with, have said things like, well, no, these people owned slaves as well, or these people were a part of the culture that oppressed my people centuries ago, then you wonder where the conversation goes from there. But the president has made it very clear he does not want to see any more of these statues vandalized or toppled over, and if that is the case, then people will be facing serious consequences. We also saw that the Department of Justice is looking into 200+ cases of vandalism in terms of statues across the country. So you can see that not only the Trump administration taking it seriously, but the DOJ as well.
But does President Trump see any difference between, say, a monument of George Washington and a Confederate soldier who fought to keep African people, or African Americans, black people, enslaved? There's no difference in the president's mind whatsoever?
Well, it's rhetoric that we haven't heard from him up until this point. He has called for, obviously, law enforcement on the local and federal levels to step in when he has seen these things happen across the country, obviously in Minneapolis, obviously in places like Virginia, and I mean, really all over the country where these statues exist. He has said that it is improper for these people to be vandalizing these statues moving forward. And so now you see this response from law enforcement, from the orders of the president. Now, how that's going to land on demonstrators, that remains to be seen. Obviously, it's a peaceful day here on Black Lives Matter Plaza. That's where we are today, but we were out here last week and it was a little tense. We were out here a few days ago and it was a little tense. So it remains to be seen just what the atmosphere will be like when you have a significant police presence joined with a number of protesters calling for some sort of change, particularly when it comes to things like police reform, Lana.
Well, speaking of that, the House Thursday took up the Justice in Policing Act of 2020 in honor of George Floyd. Republicans have opposed the bill. Meanwhile, Democrats shot down the Republican Senate bill on Wednesday, arguing that it doesn't go far enough to address police brutality. Skyler, when you're looking at all of this, does it look like there is a path forward, or will partisan politics really block police reform legislation, at least until the November election?
Well, at least up until this point, I mean, it looks like it's going to be gridlock, right, when you're talking about police reform. Just yesterday, we heard from Senator Tim Scott, who vocalized his frustrations with the Democrats' inability to respond to some of the amendments or to try to move forward his proposals in terms of wanting police reform. And then we heard today from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who essentially said the same thing, but on the opposite side. He said that there's no chance that the House's police reform bill will even make it to the Senate floor for a vote. So now what we're going to see is that partisan politics as usual. But what was interesting yesterday, though, is we heard from Senator Tim Scott, who said that he brought police reform up 5 years ago when the incident happened with Walter Scott down in South Carolina, and he didn't see anything happen there. He had that same frustration yesterday, saying that once recesses start to happen and other things start to occur, obviously we're still dealing with a pandemic here, he feels as though this conversation about police reform is going to fall by the wayside, or unless, you know, something tragic happens again that demands the nation's attention, then the conversation will happen again. But certain Democrats have said, hey, listen, this is not going to happen again. We're going to stay on this. The Democrats have really said up until this point what the GOP has proposed doesn't have enough teeth. The GOP has said that the Democrats, their proposals are simply too strong in terms of what they're demanding in terms of police officers, and it doesn't really seem like anybody's really ready to come to the table in terms of demand or in terms of wanting to create any sort of substantive change to their proposals respectively. And so now what is happening is, as you said, you know, politics as usual. We're waiting to see what will happen moving forward. The House is probably going to pass this bill, but as I mentioned, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that there's no chance that this moves forward out of that.
A lot of disappointing news coming out of Washington. Skyler Henry, thank you.
All right, Lana, thank you.